Great. Hello from Aaron Smith and Nancy Bakeman with the Energy and Environmental Building Alliance. We're really pleased to have you join our EBA webinar and podcast series. And we're really pleased to have Reese Davis with Resource Refocus joining us, and Ben Rabe from New Buildings Institute, which has actually been a great partner over the last many years to EBA. They're going to talk about state and local climate goals, and in particular, the New York Stretch Code. Ben, I think, is going to kick things off. We'll be taking questions in the Q&A section today, and I think we'll be done in about 40 minutes. Then we'll have some time for questions, but feel free to put things in the Q&A. I'll ask those to our speakers as we go through. So Ben, I'll turn it over to you, and welcome.
Awesome. Thanks, Aaron. Glad to be here. Excited to talk to everyone here today. So today we're going to talk about energy codes, the way to meet state and local climate goals. And I'm specifically going to talk about the IRA and the Zero Energy Appendix within the Energy Code. So a little bit of background here. New Buildings Institute is a 25-year-old nonprofit based in Portland, Oregon. We have folks all over the country, and we work through a variety of different kind of avenues to increase climate efficiency within the built environment. More about me. That is me. I know I look a little blurry on the screen, so it's a more clear picture of me. I'm on the codes and policy team at NBI, and kind of do work fits into two avenues, working on the 2024 IECC adoption process, as well as supporting cities and states to improve their local building code and building stock through policies. Here's a quick overview of what I'll be going through today. We're going through the introduction now, give a little bit of background on climate goals and how jurisdictions can use those to meet their goals, what the Inflation Reduction Act does and how it relates to climate, and then the Zero Energy Homes Appendix. All right, so I'm guessing that folks are pretty familiar with this image of kind of where do our climate impacts come from on a global scale. So we'll see the construction at the top. So that's the, building and embodied carbon within materials, direct and indirect residential construction, as well as commercial construction. All right, so then we base New Buildings Institute likes to think about buildings, kind of intensity and building decarbonization with these 5 general policies. So energy efficiency, I think that we're all pretty familiar with, which is doing the same amount with less. And then in aiding with that, adding renewable energy so that we're having clean ways of producing power to power the things we still need. Grid integration is where things get a little more complex with battery storage, electric vehicle charging, and that's paired very closely with building electrification. So we're not burning fossil fuels at site, which allow for things like battery storage to kind of balance out peaks and lulls. And then finally, something that we're just getting started working on and thinking about is life cycle impacts of the building industry. So that's construction, development of materials, mining of materials, as well as end of life cycle and the carbon impacts there. All right. Wondering, let's see, do we have any questions? Now is a good pausing opportunity.
Nope, not yet.
All right, I will keep going. All right, so I think folks are pretty familiar with the major ground that has been made with Inflation Reduction Act, but here are kind of the big headlines. $370 billion with a B in energy and climate spending for almost 1 billion solar panels, 220,000 wind turbines and 2,300 grid scale battery plants. It's kind of the big headlines. And more specifically to what we're talking about today, that is $1 billion in assistance for code adoption. And that goes to adopting the latest code, so either the 2021 IECC or newer, or ASHRAE 2019 or newer, knowing that new versions of both those codes are likely to come down the line before this money really trickles to jurisdictions as well. And then additionally that the Zero Energy Home Appendix is another avenue. So the breakdown here, which surprised a lot of folks, including us, is that there is about a third of it goes to local adoption of the base energy code that meets or exceeds the 2021 ICC or ASHRAE 2019. And those grants throw through state and local governments. But 2/3 of it will go towards the Zero Energy Code or the Zero Energy Appendix, which is the Appendix RC within the IECC. So that we'll get into a little bit more, but that will encourage jurisdictions to move that direction. Oh, okay, we're here. All right, so the Zero Energy Appendix, as I mentioned already, is an optional appendix within the 2021 IECC, as well as the 2024 IECC, which allows jurisdictions to adopt as mandatory or optional, which reaches net zero energy use with the use of on-site versus off-site renewable energy. So on-site energy will be balanced with on-site power production, as well as community renewable energy facilities, which is what we think as community solar gardens or renewable energy purchase contracts, which require, both those require 15-year contracts based on kind of the uses protocol. And there's an energy efficiency baseline, which is based on climate zone in the 2021 IECC, although in the 2024 IECC, they're likely to be all the same, which is calculated as per modeling per ResNet 301. Wow, I flew through my sides. Yeah, I flew through my sides. So any questions for me before I pass it over to Reese?
So Ben, how do you think the mechanism is going to work with the inflation reduction monies for the state that are then going to push the 2021 IECC? And maybe the follow-on question is, what do you see the timeline being by state? I think we're already seeing some states start to, Louisiana, I think just went to 21 IECC. Can you talk us through what you see that process looking like and how long it's going to take?
Yes, yeah. So it's taking longer than it was expected to and outlined, which is not particularly surprising. So we initially expected it to get underway early this year and then money to start flowing by the end of the year. I do not see that happening until early next year at the latest. And then kind of what that process will look like likely will be very different in every state, because we know that that is going through state energy offices, and they all operate very differently. State energy offices are in different state agencies in different states. Some states it's in organizations that look more like the EPA. Other states it's more like in Minnesota, where I'm, it's located in the Department of Commerce. So it's likely will have a lot to do with kind of how that is organized. And in Minnesota, oddly enough, the state energy office and the codes work are in different state agencies. So there'll likely be a coordination between those two agencies. And what was your second question? I apologize.
Well, I think the timeline part of it, which
oh yeah,
you answered vaguely, but because it is vague, it's not for and it varies by state. Do you think there's enough money and enough carrot there that builders today could reasonably look at the future and say there's probably 37 states that are going to adopt this and there's 13 that aren't, but you may want to start designing new homes to 2021 IECC? Are we kind of at that stage, Ben?
I would say depending on the scale of the builder, yeah, it's definitely worth having your head around the 2021 IECC, knowing that if you want to work in some states that may not have moved that way or might have taken 3-6 years to move the 2020 IECC, might be looking at it a lot sooner, with all that money coming in the door. And if you operate in many states, it might be something that folks want to look into.
Yeah, I know the talk that I've heard from a lot of builders is we're just starting to design to the 2021 IECC, depending on the state that we're in. Ben, talk to us a little bit more about the net zero home addendum piece of it.
Yeah, so it's it feels like a brand new appendix to the 2021 ICC because very few folks have adopted it. But now that it's in the IRA, we see a lot of folks will move that direction and adopt it as a way to help local jurisdictions. So I think one route that could make it more feasible in states that have a min-max code is adopt it as an optional stretch code. And then if you have a min-max code, but you're adopting the code and it's mandatory, then, for example, a jurisdiction could adopt it to help meet their climate goals. So, for example, Minnesota could adopt the 2021 ICC, and Minneapolis could include the Zero Energy Home Appendix, which would be a substantially higher bar than where things are at.
Great. And is there somewhere that people can find a list of local codes that today require Zero Energy Ready, or kind of a list of, hey, it's probably coming, 2024 in this state, maybe 2025 here? What's a great resource for that? For folks?
The U.S. DOE Energy Code site, which I can put in the chat, will have every code up to date on kind of what their base code is, as well as determinations shortly after on what kind of where their code fits compared to the model code, whether it's more stringent, less stringent, kind of the benefits of what updating would do as far as cost effectiveness and energy savings. As far as knowing what's coming down the line, it's political decision, so it's very difficult to get a grasp on where that's going. I feel like that requires some higher degree of local knowledge to know if it's coming down the pipeline.
Great. And Ben, if you take it, if you can put that in the chat, that would be fantastic. And Ben, if you take it, have you looked a lot at the Zero Energy Ready home monies for home builders, and that may have an impact in driving this? So there's kind of this, it feels like there's kind of this carrot stick approach, right? That there's this stick, which is the 2021 IECC coming, but then this carrot of 2,500 at Energy Star, 5,000 at Zero Energy Ready home. How do you think that's going to help drive the market forward?
I'm really hoping it can be a stepping stool, but I think you captured the way it's going to be viewed by a lot of folks in the carrot versus stick approach. Although the IRA, if you're a state agency, it looks like the IRA is your carrot right there. It's bringing in money to the state to really kind of pursue something, but it will be a jump for folks.
Yeah, definitely. Just a note, if you want to see the changes in the 2021 IECC by climate zone, I did an 8-part series.
Oh my gosh, wow.
Yeah, some of us, Ben, have to be code geeks, right?
No kidding. Wow.
But,
yeah, I'd be interested to see what the envelope changes in 2024, what the impact will be, knowing that those are going to be lessened for some of the kind of not that cold climates like 4 and 5.
Right, right. Yeah, and Ben, you're on that 2024 committee.
Yeah. I'm.
Well, we'd love to have you back and learn more about what you're seeing when you.
Yep. I have slides ready to go on that too. So.
Yeah, awesome. Uh, Ben, you want to turn it over to Reese?
Yes. Let me stop sharing, and I'll find that link to throw in the chat. Thank you, everyone.
You bet. Thanks, Ben.
It's a good segue. It's as if we planned it.
Yes.
But let me, hopefully that shows up well for everyone. So yeah, I'm Reese Davis. I'm a technical consultant with Resource Refocus. As part of a team with the New Buildings Institute, we've been working on developing the NYStretch Energy Code for the state of New York. I'll get into what that means, but yeah, our firm Resource Refocus works on energy modeling, energy code and policy development, and kind of supporting analyses for states and utilities on building energy science. So with that said, let's see how hard it is. Okay, great. So just to give you some background on where New York is coming from, they've laid out in their climate action plan kind of these ambitious carbon and energy savings goals that are kind of hard to wrap your head around. But effectively, one mechanism that they're going to use to get there is the building energy code in the state. And so they're kind of targeting this zero energy ready goal for 2030. So effectively, that's kind of, showing that new homes built to this code are coming in at a certain kind of site energy use intensity that when you add on rooftop solar or additional on-site generation, that you can kind of come out with this net zero building, which obviously has a lot of different definitions, and that's kind of contentious. But the idea is you really want high performance homes. So as kind of to start that process off, in 2020, NYSERDA started publishing this advanced energy code called NYStretch, and it is effectively built on the state code, the Energy Conservation Construction Code in New York State. I believe I have my C's right there. And the idea being that this one kind of stretch code that is available for all the different municipalities in the state to adopt is a little bit easier and takes the work off of the municipalities to develop their own codes, and it provides more of a singular standard for the state for those municipalities looking to go above and beyond the state code. And New York City, actually, the biggest municipality in New York, obviously, passed a local law saying that they must consider adopting the most recent NYStretch code. Now, the kind of next iteration of NYStretch, so they did NYStretch 2020. Now we are working on NYStretch 2023, and the goals for this iteration obviously are to continue that trend towards a zero energy ready code by 2030. But now we're kind of focusing on envelope performance and really trying to, we're not calling it a passive house code, and it's not quite there, but we are trying to kind of focus on the envelope and improving that above the previous codes, and also allowing builder flexibility with kind of different code mechanisms while still encouraging building decarbonization. And so the way that we structured the code is building it on IECC 2021 is that, we've talked about that. That's a pretty important code for a lot of places in the United States at this point, and ASHRAE 90.1 2019. The current state of things, I would say, so currently we have a version of NYStretch 2023 that's been effectively finalized and is being considered now by the New York City Department of Buildings for their local law. And that was kind of developed especially for New York City. We are also continuing to develop the statewide NYStretch 2023. For those of you that weren't aware, there was a recent law that came in from the budget process at the New York State government level that is basically phasing in an all-electric mandate for new construction. So taking that into account, we're kind of tweaking some things in the code, and also considering if there are some measures that are currently in the energy code that would be better served to be in the uniform building code, so the residential and building codes that have mechanical and electrical language that isn't necessarily directly tied to energy, and I'll get into some of that. And then just to show you kind of where we're hoping that this code comes in at from an energy use perspective. You can kind of see the target on the right-hand side there for 2030, and you can kind of see where we're coming from with 2018 and 2021 IECCs, and then the 2020 New York Stretch, which I've split out by fuel type, and that's kind of another discussion around this. Fuel types have a big impact on the site energy use intensity of a code. And now that we're kind of looking at pretty much an all-electric residential code, and I should have started at the front here and said that we Resource Refocus are working on the residential code. I'll discuss some aspects of the commercial code, but most of this presentation focuses on the residential code, which covers single family and low-rise multifamily up to 3 stories. You can see that for the all-electric buildings, if we're kind of targeting an EUI for this 2023 New York Stretch, just kind of getting linearly closer to that zero energy ready mark, we're aiming for a site EUI in the low 20s when kind of considering a typical home. So to look at the actual measures that we're proposing and compared to previous, the 2020 baseline, so the 2020 state code and the 2020 New York City code, which is based on the 2020 New York Stretch code. So looking kind of component by component, looking at fenestration, so especially windows here, you can see that basically we're proposing 0.25 U factor across the board for all windows in all climate zones, and proposing a solar heat gain coefficient maximum level, basically, that didn't exist in the 5A and 6A climate zones previously. The other envelope components, you can see we're not changing too much on the ceiling side, just adding a continuous insulation option in all climate zones. For wood-framed walls, we are effectively just kind of increasing the continuous insulation. You'll see that the 20 plus 9 basically means 20 R20 cavity insulation, R9 continuous insulation. And I know I'm getting into the weeds a little bit here, but hopefully there are folks who are maybe interested in the weeds a little bit on this call. So yeah, increasing the levels of continuous insulation. There are also measures I'll get into later that we're taking to kind of avoid thermal bridging in this code that haven't existed previously. So I'll get into that in a bit. And then just kind of upping the floor R value requirements. For foundation levels, kind of a similar story, just increasing levels of continuous insulation, because that's continuous insulation. That's the best way to avoid thermal bridging through the envelope, and kind of just increasing some of the slab R value and depth that the insulation is required to go below the slab. The air leakage requirements are not changing too much on the mandatory side, still 3 air changes per hour. We are tweaking the language so that it's better in alignment with the commercial language. And the reason for that is, if you have a 3-story multifamily building, we don't really want the requirements to be drastically different than the 4-story commercial building. So we're trying to adjust that and align those two languages to be similar. We are requiring testing by an approved agency. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean a third party, but it does kind of just ensure that the folks doing the air leakage testing, have the credentials to do so, and that's going to be kind of at the discretion of the code official. So as I said, the thermal bridging mitigation section that we're adding requires above ground walls to either use continuous insulation, which many of those options, there's a couple different options for them to use, structurally insulated panels, insulated concrete forms, or double wall framing. So this is effectively kind of removing the option to just use cavity insulation in a standard, 2x4, 2x6 wall, wood frame wall. And so we're really harping on that, need to use continuous insulation or some other method of mitigating thermal bridging in the above ground walls. There's other language around just envelope, not piercing the envelope with any balconies or beams without any sort of thermal break or insulation. Same kind of installation requirements for windows and parapets. There's an alternative calculation that buildings may go through to kind of get out of these kind of more prescriptive requirements. That's located in the commercial language, but it basically requires builders to go through the process of calculating the kind of effective U factor when considering thermal bridging impacts. So that's obviously, that provides flexibility, but does add complications if you're going to go that route. Nothing huge changing on the duct systems, but just required to be in a conditioned space or buried in ceiling insulation and just sized appropriately. One of the bigger changes we're making is on water heating efficiency. So we are basically requiring builders to take one of 5 packages that are available. If you don't want to use an above minimum efficiency water heating system, then you are kind of left with package 1 or 2, and that's either kind of using solar water heating backup or supplemental solar water heating, or drain water heat recovery and recirculation pump. But really, I think the easiest option through this section is to just go with a heat pump water heater and either use a very efficient heat pump water heater or kind of a standard efficient heat pump water heater with one extra measure associated with it. And that's just the kind of like keep chipping away at the water heating savings that a code can achieve, which I think historically has not been a big focus of the energy code. It's been more on the heating and cooling energy use. Speaking of, we are requiring a heater energy recovery ventilator with 70% sensible recovery efficiency in all climate zones, which is a change from the IECC, which just requires them in climate zones 6, 7, and 8, I believe. And then finally, the last thing that we're requiring in the prescriptive section is the this energy credits, which is a new mechanism in the energy code, and that's being developed in the 2024 IECC. And this is kind of a more simplified one from what's kind of probably be in the 2024 IECC, although I'm sure Ben can speak more to that. But we're effectively just requiring small single-family units and low-rise multifamily units to get 12 credits here, and larger single-family homes to get 15 credits. And basically, you're just choosing from these options that are above the prescriptive, more stringent than the prescriptive section language. But basically, there's 3 envelope efficiency options, 3 air tightness options, an option to upgrade the HRV, ERV efficiency or HVAC distribution system. And then kind of the big one is the HVAC credits, which basically require some level of heat pump. So if you don't want to improve your HVAC, mechanical efficiency and just keep it at that federal minimum efficiency, you can opt for the most kind of stringent envelope and air tightness levels to hit that 15 credit mark. That's basically a passive house level building at that point. Or you can just take a heat pump and tack on a couple other kind of easier to achieve credits, I would say. And so that's kind of what we're going for here. And then just one last talk about the energy rating index, which is an alternative compliance pathway. We are, based on the modeling associated with the prescriptive section, we're lowering the energy rating maximum targets for each climate zone, but then also splitting it out between buildings with combustion equipment and without combustion equipment, just because of how ResNet 301 methodology ends up kind of treating these 2 different kinds of buildings. So you can see those new targets there. A couple measures that we've talked about putting in but have ultimately kind of come out and are going to go into the uniform building code are related to electric readiness for buildings that aren't necessarily required to be all electric, rooftop solar, energy storage systems, electric vehicle readiness, and kind of grid interactivity. Just kind of, I won't spend too much time on the results, but we did a modeling, exercise on the kind of Department of Energy single family and low rise multifamily prototypes using these, prescriptive measures from the 2023 New York Stretch Code. And I talked earlier about how we were kind of targeting that an EUI in the low 20s for, when this is all said and done. And for the kind of all electric version of these New York homes built in New York Stretch, that's kind of where we came out at. And that's pretty promising to see that this code can really, make that big leap forward towards the zero energy ready homes. Getting more into the nitty gritty on site energy impacts, in each climate zone and region here, and New York City, which is climate zone 4, but split out because it has a different baseline code. We're comparing the baseline codes for both a mixed fuel home and an electric home compared to an all electric home built in New York Stretch in that third column. And you can see that, there's pretty significant energy savings associated with this code. And obviously site energy depends a lot on which fuel you use, which is why you can see those, huge chunks of site energy used for heating and water heating in the mixed fuel homes. I am going to jump to probably what's more important, kind of a similar story on multifamily. I think the energy costs are really what's more important, even though we are kind of using site energy use as a metric. This is, assuming these kind of regionally specific, utility specific energy rates for gas and electric. But you'll see that in all upstate climate zones, so not New York City, the all electric New York Stretch building performs better from an energy cost standpoint than either the mixed fuel or the electric baseline buildings. I think in New York City, you see it's a little cheaper. The New York Stretch iteration does have a slightly higher energy cost than the mixed fuel baseline, just due to the costs of gas versus electricity in New York. But that is, something we're still, I do want to frame all these results as there's still tweaks being made. There's still a discussion of whether the baseline should even, consider gas now that things are changing in terms of the state legislature for all electric buildings. Kind of a similar story on multifamily. But just then talking about the incremental first costs associated with the code, there are, pretty significant costs associated with this code that do end up, in most cases, paying for themselves. But the biggest areas of costs that we're looking at are, wall and foundation insulation costs. And then that HRV, ERV cost is also pretty significant. And so, we don't want to just say that there's no impact of going to this code, but we do think it's worth these upfront costs as we're kind of trying to get down to that zero energy home. And really also it's about building homes that are comfortable and healthy. And I think ventilation is a big part of that. And I think, passive survivability is a big part of that. Mm-hmm. And then just looking at the cost impacts as a percent of the total component of the cost. So, the HVAC costs, when you're talking about the HRV, ERV system, the potential heat pump upgrade, they do have a kind of significant impact on the HVAC component cost, whereas the foundation and envelope costs aren't as significant as a percentage of the total component costs. Multifamily has a similar story, although the water heating costs are kind of more of the big chunk there. Similar stories for the percent of total component. I know that I just threw a ton of numbers at everyone, but I think what I want the takeaway to be here is that, this, as all these codes are kind of reaching closer and closer to that zero energy, code component, and like the Zero Energy Appendix that Ben was talking about earlier, there are costs associated with this, but the technology for all these, components is there and achievable. And I think, it's reasonable to expect some of these costs to come down. I think also just in general, high performing buildings, are something that we can achieve and have benefits beyond just energy costs. There's resilience benefits associated with it. I think, just in terms of having lower energy bills, there's equity benefits there. So that's kind of just the takeaways I wanted to share from the NYStretch energy process, which again is still ongoing, and hopefully we'll have something out to the Code Council and to the Department of State in the coming months, but that's still going through internal and public processes. So I don't want to frame anything here as fully finalized, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Reese, it's very interesting what's happening in New York City in particular, but New York State in general. And I think you've got great support there for some of these changes. How are the trades receiving it?
I think it's mixed, which I think makes sense. There are certainly builders who have kind of, New York, like over the past decade, New York's really focused on, building these more high performance and green buildings. And I think there's a lot of builders who've gotten on board with that. And that's just the way that they've structured things. And I think, and perhaps for this code is not really for them, I suppose I'd say. But it's, I think because of the costs increase, and I will say it's not just costs, there are kind of technical, like building strategy components to this, building with continuous insulation as opposed to just putting in cavity insulation everywhere, and putting in the HRV, ERV systems. There's aspects of this that have a technical component to them that some builders haven't been accustomed to building with before. And I think there's also kind of a hesitancy there to, there are trainings that are going to be required, and just, there's support that's going to be needed from the state. And I'll just say that that's something we're actively working with NYSERDA and Department of State on. And I know there's other efforts outside of that going on to just, increase training for builders and code officials to know how to kind of make sure that these buildings do achieve what they set out to. So I think mixed bag, but I think a lot of that can be mitigated with, good support from the state. That's going to be a big factor here.
Yeah, and are you seeing training with the code officials as well, so that they're becoming experts in this new requirement?
Yeah, I think that's a huge part of it. So we've kind of had 2020, the NYStretch 2020 code as a first run at these kind of higher above state codes, where you really do have to get the code officials involved, because they're doing all kinds of, they're just trying to make sure also that the fire codes are implemented in these kind of life health and safety things, which there are aspects of the energy code that are health and safety, but you want to make sure at first that the fire code is passed and then kind of get to the energy code. So it's there's a focus on making sure that these code officials who have a lot on their plate are still also brought up to speed on these kind of more niche energy code requirements. And that's that's kind of always a balance and struggle, but I think that's a big focus for NYSERDA right now too.
Reese, does your costing data, which I found to be very interesting, take into account that homeowners may be eligible for rebates on some of the new equipment that's going to go into these houses?
Yeah, that's a good, I'm glad you brought that up. That hasn't been part of the story that we've kind of been telling for now, but I think it definitely should be. I'm always a little hesitant with rebates to, put a dollar amount, like, show that on the graph like here, but really we can erase this number because rebates do change, and they it's hard to include them in every planning process because they're not always there right up front, and there's a process that you have to go through. However, there are rebates available, and they do for especially for heat pumps now. Like I think there's definitely a lot of money available that can kind of zero out a lot of those component costs. That's really.
I mean, I like the way you show it because it's not disingenuous. It's like, here's the full cost. But then in my mind, as I was looking at it, I was like, yeah, but I get $5,000 as a builder if I hit Zero Energy Ready, which would be not that much further than where you're at with the stretch code. And then the homeowner is going to receive some rebates as well. So there's a potential, depending on your client, for it to net out at the end of the day.
Yeah, definitely.
And Reese, do you follow this outside of New York at all? Because I think what we're seeing nationally is more states, more cities starting to go to these type of stretch codes as part of their climate plan. Can you talk about that a little bit? And where, I guess it's more generally, where do you see the marketplace going, and how soon is this coming to all of us?
Yeah, I mean, I think, we do work on kind of code and code compliance outside of New York. And, if you're seeing states, like Idaho and Montana, realizing that this is like a place where, there's real benefit to homeowners, real benefits to everyone to, building to these code levels, I think you can safely say that this is, applicable everywhere. And, the New York stretch code that we're developing might represent a slightly higher bar than even IECC 2021. But I think there's a clear trend that this is, I think, the direction where new homes are going towards is just really high performance, because I think that's what people want, is to live in a high performance home and have the benefits that are associated with that. And so I think it's a win-win for everyone.
Yeah, Reese, I noted one thing that I think there's been a lot of conversation at EBA around is including the solar heat gain coefficient on windows, because even in northern climates, I'm in climate zone 6, I think Ben is as well, Nancy is as well. We're seeing an incredible amount of solar heat gain into these buildings. So I think, can you just talk about maybe some of the background and why that decision was taken to go to a solar heat gain coefficient to reject excess heat into the envelope?
Yeah, that was not an area I was expecting to be particularly controversial or require. I mean, we try to use as much background research when we're developing this as possible, but there was a lot of discussion around that, and on the commercial side as well. But ultimately, I think in some of the modeling that we saw and kind of just general research that we saw, like we were seeing, like even in those, upstate New York climate zones 5, 6, that solar heat gain coefficient was really in the summer months really impacting the performance of the buildings. I guess if you have no, really regulation of the solar heat gain coefficient on windows, it really does impact the performance of building, even in those climate zones. And so, our decision to kind of include that in a way that it hasn't been included previously in those climate zones, I think it's reflected there. I think there's also, we did talk about and have done a few modeling exercises on, although nothing to really report on as a final results, but just like when you start to look at future weather files and kind of extreme weather, just the general warming of the summers in upstate New York that we're expecting to see over the next 30 years. I think that only kind of helps back up that decision a little bit. But
yeah, I think that we just saw 3 major metropolitan areas in the United States move from climate zone 4 to climate zone 3 in the last iteration, and we may see more of that. But
yeah,
very critical, I think, that high performance builders consider a solar heat gain coefficient in their window as they go forward. And Boy, I would agree with you too, Reese. I've got the tattoo that says "Thou shalt put in an ERV."
Yeah. And, you know, it's fun. I'll just one thing on that. We've talked about, you know, whether that even makes sense as an energy measure or as like a kind of requirement in a uniform building code, just because it really, you know, at this point in time, when you're making envelopes this tight, you really just like balanced ventilation is pretty important to have, and just having that outdoor airflow, not just trusting that it's going to come in through the, you know, through cracks in the walls. So we're talking about kind of how to treat that still a little bit, but definitely I think, you know, HRV, ERV just kind of needs to be the way that we build buildings at this point.
That's great. Ben, any final thoughts as we wrap things up? I think that was all the questions that we have today.
Perfect. I was just looking. There's a solar heat gain expansion as part of the 2024 IECC. So I was hoping to throw that into the chat, but other than that, I'm glad folks were able to join today.
Yeah, absolutely fantastic to have you both. Ben and New Buildings Institute, always great to partner with you. And Reese and Resource Refocus, it was incredible to hear about your work on the New York State stretch codes and what's going on there. So I want to thank you for being with us today and sharing some of your knowledge.
Thank you for having us. It's really, really great to talk about.
Great. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.